that I thank Sandy and Rhonda for their vision of what DITE could be and what it became. I know I can speak for myself that it was an important part of me actually earning tenure at Howard. And I used the opportunity and the feedback that I was given while I was a fellow in the program to give back as a mentor. And so everybody in this panel has been a mentor in DITE, and Trayvon, I believe, was a fellow around the same time that I was. So they're each just share their own perspective about a question that I will ask them, and they'll have about 10 minutes to answer the question. And then once everyone answers their specific question, we'll open up the floor from any questions from the audience. And so I'm gonna start with Linda. As a Black woman in the economics profession, what are some of your experiences in having mentorships or providing mentorships to others?
Okay, hi, I'm Linda Luber. Today is my very last day, August the 10th, of being the interim chair of the economics department at Morgan State University. I was that for 5 years, so, it was DITE that really helped me to move into that associate faculty and tenure and promotion, and now I'm about ready to move into the next, but I'm having a sabbatical at Johns Hopkins. Now, I'm being in the econ department at Morgan State. It's a small department, first of all, and that having a mentor in a small department and being the only Black female in the department, even though it's small, I'm still the only one. I have to reach out to other departments and find help to be able to understand the trajectory and how you need to, what you need to do just to understand all the nuances. And there are a lot of nuances that one has to go through to get to that next step. And you don't know it just automatically. I had to reach out to other Black women who had done this. I want to say, I came out of the University of Texas at Dallas, and I didn't know anything about the National Economic Association. I didn't know that there were other Black economists out there. My economists, they were from the School of Chicago, they were from, Harvard, they were, but I didn't know, and nobody told me until I ran into Bill Spriggs and found out about this organization, the NEA. And so I just want to emphasize how important it is to be able to have someone you can reach out to for these little questions. I mean, and they may seem a little, stupid or whatever, but you just don't know the terrain in which you have to deal with in an economics department, or just being a professor in a university for that matter. And so for me, mine had to come from, I knew education, people who were in education, they were the ones that really helped me go through all of the terrain that I had to go through to move there. But one thing I want to point out about mentors is that being a mentor becomes very important. I don't have the faculty that I'm mentoring so much, I mean, except for maybe in another department, because the econ department is so small. But I'm there and I'm helpful, but it's those younger people who are in school. I brought my young students to the big ASSA meetings just so that they could know that there are these other women out there. I'd take them to the C-SWEP. I'd take them, to different places just so they would know. And so hopefully one day, what I've provided for them as if they go into the academic world, they will, they always can reach out to me. The one other thing I want to point out, though, is that you never know who you might be mentoring, because it might be just how you act, what the kinds of things you do, the kinds of things that you produce, and just, being there with a welcoming smile and, kind of, can I help you? So you never know. And that time might be there, and you are mentoring and helping, and you just, anyway, so keep that in mind as, you might be out there in your own worlds.
Thank you, Linda. So Jose, what are the unique considerations and issues that confront faculty members from underrepresented groups that are not faced by faculty members from overrepresented groups, and how can you use them to negotiate successfully?
So I'm Jose Fernandez from the University of Louisville. I'm also a member of SIMGAP. That's the Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the Economic Profession. Nice mouthful there. And I'm chair of my department, and I'm also the president of ASH, the American Society of Hispanic Economists. So I have some familiarity with this type of thing, and I kind of did what I'll tell you not to do. You will be called on to do service to no end. This is the truth. You will be called because you will be that 1% from your department, the 1% that represents that group. And you're assumed to know everything from that group. So you will be called upon for a lot of service. There'll be assumptions made about your research. Is your research political in a certain way? Is your research dictated towards a certain group? Or even the reverse could happen. What do you mean you don't do racial disparities research? What do you mean you don't do differences between ethnic groups? Those are going to be the challenges that you will face. What you're going to need is a good chair and an advocate. There's lots of types of mentors. There's the mentor that challenges you. There's the mentor that's your kind of cheerleader, your advocate, the person who goes out and fights for you. And there's the connectors. And in this room are the connectors. Like, this is where you get that networking effect. And the reason you need that networking effect is all because of the hidden curriculum, right? Which I'll put in a plug for my mentee over there. He's got a great podcast called The Hidden Curriculum. But there's a lot that we don't know until we get into spaces like this, right? So you don't know that you should be saying no to some of those assignments and saying, I need to protect my time if I want to get tenure at this institution. You need to be able to be comfortable to say that, and in some cases you might be too scared to say that, so you need a colleague who will come in and step in that place. I know that's something that I have done for my assistant professors. I beat down all the deans to come knocking down my door, everyone else to protect their time. It's unfortunate that we have to constantly provide that support, that we're the ones who are constantly having to represent our group. And it feels sometimes like you don't have those outside allies, right? They're only there to give you the work. So what I would say is if they're going to give you additional services to do, you should negotiate it for additional time off from teaching so that it doesn't hinder your research. You have to protect your research time. It's your currency that's external to the institution, right? How good you teach is an internal signal. How great of a service person you are is internal to the institution. Unfortunately, your research is your only currency. It's the one that advertises who you are. So that's the time that must be protected. So if they want you to serve on X committees, then they have to knock down on your teaching load. And if they don't like that, well, they can ask someone else who can serve on those same committees. It might benefit them to be part of the diversity committee in the College of Business. It might benefit them to see those types of things. The other thing that happens that's kind of exclusive to this group is you are not really anonymous. You will receive surveys and questions and things of that nature. You're always going to be identified in those groups. So you're going to have to take a stance as a person on whether or not you want that voice to be heard or if you're going to be quiet. And that's really up to you as an individual. But do know ahead of time that those are not going to be anonymous surveys. You are going to be identified. I mean, you look around your own department and you feel alone. When we come to these types of events, we're like, wow, there really are this many other people who kind of look like us. Right? It almost shocks us every time it happens. All right? So I've taken the stance that I'm going to be vocal about it. I'm going to be vocal about it, and that's why I've taken the positions I've taken as we've gone through. And a lot of it is due to DITE. If it wasn't for knowing this hidden curriculum, if it wasn't for knowing that these networks exist, knowing that I have value in the profession, I don't think I would have taken the stances that I have. So that's how I would encourage you to embrace those types of situations. You should look at it as an asset rather than a liability.
Thank you, Jose. So, Anusha, to follow up on his point about networks, what is your advice for purposely developing a network of allies that support you professionally?
Thanks so much for asking that question, Omari. So I'm Anusha Chari. I'm a professor of economics and finance at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And the other hat that I wear is as associate chair and director of mentoring for CSWEP. So over the last year or two, I've got very involved with the mentoring initiatives at CSWEP. And one thing that really struck me was that these networks don't happen by accident or happenstance. We have to be really purposeful about developing these networks of mentors and allies who are going to help us navigate our way through the profession. Because if we just rely on chance, it may or may not happen. And as both Linda and Jose have said so eloquently, there is a hidden curriculum, and we could just get left out and not have very important information that could help us navigate those nuances that Linda talked about. So one thing that helps me, because I like to make lists, is to think about, well, we can take an analytical approach to this, right? And think about our personal and professional development. So I want to emphasize that oftentimes we just talk about professional development like we're these, work machines, but we're human beings, and there is a personal aspect to our development which I think often just gets ignored in the grind for tenure or for professional advancement. So the thing, we sort of use this rubric, and it comes from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And I can send a link to that to Gwen, and she can share it. And we also sort of modified that at Cement to sort of help scholars develop this personal and professional development plan, right, in an analytical way that we are all so comfortable with doing. And so the first thing, and I'm just going to break this down a little bit, is to think about what are my priorities, right? So if I can take a 1 to 2 year view of what are my priorities and really force myself to write those down. And it could just be 2 or 3 or 4 priorities in the next 1 to 2 years. I need to get XYZ papers published, or I want to be able to present at certain conferences, or whatever those priorities are. I want to be able to go to the gym more. These could be our priorities, and based on that, to be able to write a mission statement. This is what I want to be able to do. And it's almost like developing this vision board for professional and personal development, and to sort of divide that up into what are my personal goals and what are my professional goals, right? And those personal goals could be 1 to 2 year goals, and then more medium-term goals. I want to take a trip to Thailand, or I want to be able to go bungee jumping, or whatever it is, and sort of have kind of a timeline view of this, but not just write those goals down, but to have action steps, right? What am I going to have to do to achieve those personal goals in the next year or two or over the medium term? And similarly for professional goals, what are my professional goals in the near term, and what are my professional goals in the medium term, and what are action steps? So we can actually sort of write all of this down in a worksheet, and I feel like whenever I've written things down, I'm on my way to actualizing those goals and my vision for myself in the next year or two or in the medium term. And so I want to sort of also touch upon some things that both Linda and Jose talked about, is that once we have this mission statement of what is it that I want to achieve in the next year or two, to then think about, in terms of, let's sort of divide it into professional development and personal development. So in terms of professional support, who are those senior colleagues and professionals in the field who are going to provide professional support? And like Jose said, there might be some people, some mentors who are going to challenge us, and there are going to be some mentors who are just going to, make us feel good when we get our rejection letters, which are inevitable, right? And sort of, who are going to tell you to go away. It's all right, you can go sulk. Or as Peter Henry, who's always been such a support and ally to me, would always say, Anusha, go get a pint of ice cream and eat it. And I would happily eat it. So the thing is that to think about these professional support in terms of supporters and promoters, and these could be internal. So we need a set of people within our university or within our department. As Linda mentioned, that even at the university, it had to be someone outside the department, as well as outside the university who provide this professional support, who are people who are going to promote you. There could also be a set of people who provide access to professional opportunities. People sort of think about, well, who are the people who actually invite me to conferences? Who are the people who invite me to seminars? Who are the people who are sort of reaching out to me and are helping me navigate my way through this career? And finally, we need an intellectual community, because at the end of the day, we live in a publish or perish world. And so who are the people who are going to be able to read my papers? So I think it's really important to have one or two senior colleagues, and oftentimes I've been struck by how generous people are. And if they're pressed for time, you could just say, could you please read my introduction and give me some feedback, right? So then that's a bite-sized sort of ask. And a lot of people are very generous and will get back to you with, oh, I think you should position it this way, or your contribution needs to be made more clear, or this is the way you could do it, and so on. So like I said, I don't want to sort of, I really want to think about personal development too. So here, it's sort of like coming up with that list of people, family and friends and mentors in our personal lives that we rely on for emotional support, and people who sort of provide access to those personal opportunities, people who encourage us to explore volunteer work or travel opportunities or physical fitness challenges and so on. So who are those people in our lives who are providing us access to those personal opportunities? And also, I think it's often important to have an intellectual community that's outside our professional intellectual community. People who are going to be our friends and family, who are going to challenge our ideas. They're going to be coming from outside. And oftentimes, it's those people who also provide us with some questions that we hadn't thought about. And they're coming from people who are just sort of, viewing the world not through the lens of economics. And oftentimes, that can provide a creative spark or challenge our idea. So I think it's sort of important to have an intellectual community outside. And then finally, role models, people that we look up to. We see their career trajectory, and we're like, okay, what are the things they did? How did their career evolve, and what can I learn from it? And these role models, these people that we sort of look up to. So I'm just sort of going to end by saying that I think it's really important, because early on in my career, I was just sort of, wandering around, and things would happen or not happen. And as time went on, I started to realize the importance of being purposeful in sort of thinking about professional and personal development and how to develop these networks. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Anusha. And for our last prepared question is for Trayvon. In DITE, we support the process of earning tenure from going from an assistant to an associate professor. Are there different types of advice that are relevant to junior faculty member by the different type of institution that they're at, be it a community college, liberal arts, or research? Additionally, can you expand on the advice as it pertains to this person being in the economics department, policy, business, public health, or other type of school?
So thank you for that short question. I'm Siobhan Logan, and currently I am the Hazel C. Youngberg Trustees Distinguished Professor of Economics at The Ohio State University. Runners-up in the 2021 College Football Championship. I'm the Associate Dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, former Interim Dean of Social and Behavioral Sciences, et cetera, former President of the National Economic Association a little bit ago. And I say all of that because I was in the very first DITE cohort, and so I want to thank Dr. Darity. This also means DITE's really old if I'm doing all of this stuff from being an assistant professor. But to the issue of tenure, I want to start at a level above your unit as you're a faculty member, because in my administrative duties, I've seen, tenure goes somewhere else. Your packet leaves your department, and then it floats somewhere else for about 6 months or 8 months, and then you get a decision at the end. And so the differences are at all of those levels. So the first thing, and getting back to a point that Jose mentioned about differences between types of units, is that your external audience is typically conditional on the type of unit that you're in. If you're in a policy school, your external scholarly audience are other policy researchers. If you're in a business school, even in an economics department in a business school, the external audience will typically be economists in business schools. If you're in a traditional economics department in a College of Arts and Sciences, the traditional audience, scholarly audience, will be other economists to consume your work. And so you'll want to think about where you're at in terms of where your visibility lies. And the weights that get attached to different types of outlets varies by departments within a particular discipline. So not every economics department weights all of the publication outlets the same. And it is also going to be a function of where you're at, whether you're an economist in the law school, whether you're an economist in a business school, whether you're an economist in a health policy department as well. So those are all important considerations to make. One thing that I encourage assistant professors to do very early on in their assistant professorship is to read a very obscure document that typically your faculty don't read very often, which is your department or your school's appointments, promotion, and tenure document. It may be really long, but it is worth an investment to read it. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. One, a dean actually doesn't read these documents until it's time to do promotion and tenure stuff, I can say for a fact. And the one thing that a dean will look back and go back to in this is that document will lay out the requirements for a tenured position and promotion to tenure, which means that it is not necessarily cut and dry of do A, B, and C, and you shall be awarded tenure, but it explains how the department will have to frame your case, irrespective of your publication record, for what would be meriting promotion on all of the metrics, research, teaching, and service. And so you need to read that document to understand what the expectations are, and those where some of that variation can come close. It is not uncommon, for example, if you're in a finance department, that you must have a publication in one of 3 finance journals, or you simply won't be awarded tenure. And they can be very cut and dry about that process. So you could have 8 econometrica publications, and you would not receive tenure in the finance department at Ohio State. You do not meet the criteria for tenure. The econ department would love to have you. We would really, really love to have you, but you would not meet those requirements. And it's very important to know that from the outset, if the requirements are that explicit, that you understand what the expectations are. Another piece to that is understanding what those expectations are should allow you to think about the ways in which you interact with your colleagues, because in the end, they are the ones who have to make the case for you to the dean, to the college promotion and tenure committee, to the provost committee about the reasons why they are supporting or not supporting your case for promotion. And so it is important to continue to mention to your colleagues or to circulate to your colleagues the things that are related to your scholarly visibility in particular. And that's not necessarily be a bragging thing, but if a department is sending around a monthly notice or a weekly notice about things that the faculty are doing, and you were on MSNBC or you were quoted in the New York Times, those are notable things. And I will also say that those are things that reach the attention of your dean and your provost, and that says, hey, that's somebody, they have no idea what you're publishing and they really don't care, but they know your name and they think that's somebody who's really valuable and that's someone whose name I'm now going to start paying attention to. And so you do have to do a little bit of self-promotion. And that is one of the things that can really ease some of those discussions about the visibility of your work, especially because, particularly as economists, we are, and I know this from the most recent promotion and tenure college committee meeting, we are the slowest publishing social science of all of the social sciences. And we're not just a little bit slower than the rest of them, we're literally orders of magnitude slower than the other social science disciplines. And so it's very, very important that people understand that, because they have to understand the discipline that we're working in, and that's something that you have to do as you build up your case. Another issue I want to speak to, because this does become important, especially as I see universities leaning into this more for assistant professorships, are interdisciplinary positions, where people as assistant professors are housed in 2 departments or 3 departments, and this can become very, very treacherous at the time of promotion and tenure. You should almost never want to be simultaneously reviewed for promotion by any more than one department. One department will be crazy enough and have enough internal issues in terms of just handling your case, but when you multiply that over multiple units, that will become very difficult. So yet at the same time, universities are investing quite heavily in interdisciplinary positions. I would strongly encourage you, when you begin in those positions, to have very clear and documented evidence about what the expectations are for promotion and tenure. One caveat I'll add to the document that I was just referencing is that depending on your institution, whenever you have a new dean and or whenever you have a new chair, those documents can be revised. You have the option of going up for promotion under the document that you were hired under or under the document that currently exists. So when I became the chair of the economics department some years ago, I did make some changes to the APT document. They're relatively minor, but they are important, and they would be important to some particular scholars. And so make sure that you're aware of changes to those very important documents. And the reason they're very important is any good letter coming out of your department about your case will reference that document and then reference your particular achievements in that area and why you meet that criteria. So it's a very important piece to understand how you're going to be viewed, and that is the principal document that's viewed at the college level, at the provost office, et cetera. And that's a really important piece of your case, and so it's really important to understand the inputs into that.
All right. Thank you, Trayvon. So at this time, if there's anybody who has any general questions from the floor that anybody could answer, please.
Thank you. This was really enlightening. I have a question that sort of was sparked by Professor Logan, mentioning changing the document, right? So you all are successful. You have some degree of power now. You appear to be in positions to improve some of the things that I think that we've been talking about over the past few days. Do you feel empowered to be the voices that say things like, I think we should give more credit to service of, mentoring underrepresented minorities, right? Like the things that we complain about are not valued in the academy. Are you now in positions to try to make those things valued?
first one to answer that, and so I can speak specifically about what I changed in the APT documents. You now need to have not only a statement about diversity, but your contributions to it are now part of the promotion and tenure process in the department. That may have been revised because I'm no longer the chair and it might have just been struck out, but at least for some cohort of people, it was a document that would apply to them. Another thing that I changed, which I think is just very important, and we had a very long discussion in the department about it, is that the slow publication process has led to some problems for tenuring faculty who are under a standard clock. 6 years used to be a lot of time. I now know papers, 4 rounds at a top 5 journal and then a rejection or something like this. It's really disastrous. But we're now faced with this situation of potentially tenuring people who have, literally 1 or 2 publications. And so we had to establish that quantity would be important in the unit, and that led to a really long discussion about what that really meant. But we had to decide that the prospects of error are much more likely if we're tenuring someone who has relatively few publications versus someone who may not have any, quote unquote, top 5 publications, but has a stronger research profile. And so those are the types of the things that we can do. That also goes to valuing outlets that turn papers around more quickly, which would be field journals, which are also, frankly, outlets that publish more work from underrepresented scholars. And so if you're thinking about building the totality of a scholarly profile, you probably then aren't just going to be obsessed over the top 5 publications. And so there are some really instrumental ways that you can invoke those changes. And I think part of being in academic leadership is entering in those conversations with your colleagues. It's not necessarily that your colleagues have animus in mind. They're just, they're now old like me, and it was like, why is this journal taking a year to review your paper? They were always really quick, 15 years ago, right? And now, you seem really old, and our documents can be out of step to what's currently going on in the profession. And so we need to have those and engage in those conversations. And that's really one of the duties of academic leaders. And so if you have leadership that you trust, surface those issues to them. And there are literally things that they can do about it. And I think that's one of the most positive things of being in administration is there are actually ways in which we can, through the current governance structure, try to make some headway on those issues.
Anybody else have any follow-up on that?
I'd just like to say that when also like the pandemic has introduced a whole new set of complexities, and I think that we talked about this, I think Francisca brought this up the day before yesterday, or yesterday, about, clearly there's going to have to be some recognition of the hardship that the pandemic has caused and the disparate impacts of that on faculty productivity. All these data came out as by gender, that research by male economists just took off during the pandemic, and by female economists fell. And it wasn't even sort of this backlog effect of, once you got rid of that backlog effect, that's going to have a cascading impact on lags to publication, quantity of publications, and so on. And so I think that I, for one, am gearing up for having these conversations about what is the nature of the accommodation and how do we preserve privacy, right, in the process.
Great.
Yeah, I see 2 HBCU faculty up there. And I would like either one of you to address to what extent is this advice translatable or not to the HBCU scholarly teaching environment?
So I'll speak at Howard, which is the only HBCU with a PhD program, and so it's probably going to be a little different. But we don't have sort of the 4-4, 5-4 teaching loads that other faculty do have at HBCUs. And I think one of the things that's helpful in that regard is when I came to Howard, the economics faculty at Howard teaches less than all the other faculty at the university. We teach the 2-2, everybody else teaches 3-3, and I think because it is different, it allows me and the other faculty members in our department to be able to do more research than other faculty can because we don't teach as much. And if you're at an institution that has high teaching load, it should be expected that your research productivity is lower than if you didn't have such a high teaching load. And it goes back to Trayvon and understanding the documents. At your school, at some HBCUs, teaching might be valued at a much higher rate than the amount of publications you have. And so that's why it's important to understand what your institution values the most to make sure that you're reaching those goals for your specific institution.
Well, I could say we've been in a transitional period for a while for coming out of so much teaching and to doing more research, because that's the goal of the president, is to become an R1 institution. And so there's this tension then, well, I've been in this, and not me personally, but I've been in this trajectory of fewer publications, and, you know, because we have a 4-4 teaching load, and now you expect me, just because we're moving, or you want to be in this research one, that now I have to have more publications, because, so we're very, some departments are still staying where they are, and if the person has come on, particularly when that was always the way it was, that you're more interested in the teaching as opposed to not having tons of publication and doing the research. But if you're newer coming in, there's more expectation now to do more research and publication, as opposed to, well, but still at the same time, because we haven't moved from the 4-4 to still do the 4-4. So some people will say, I don't think this place is for me, because, you know, I want to publish, and but I don't, you know, that to teach all these classes, you know, is time consuming. So it becomes catch-22 for us. But I have to admit, there are those who, you know, if they have a wife at home who can do whatever and let them do their teaching and their research, they can do quite well. But, you know, I'm a female, and I may not have the young kids right now, but, you know, I have the grandkids, and so it's you know, you're doing the same kinds of things in your personal life that, you know, maybe the male counterpart's wife is doing, plus you're doing that. So it becomes stressful at times, or you just, you know, say, forget it. I have friends that, you know, I'm not going to worry about it. If I don't get tenure, I don't get tenure. And then I have other folks, you know, who just say, you know, they just bulldoze through it and, you know, come out with no hair or whatever. I'm teasing, but you know what I'm saying. It becomes, you know, it's just, you know, so stressful. But they want to get the tenure. They, you know, there's just some security in having tenure. But at an HBCU, at least my HBCU for the econ department, you know, we had just the master's program beyond the undergrad. So, but it's still, you know, they still expect, you know, particularly if you are a female, well, they want you to do everything. That's why today's my last day as an interim chair. Not doing everything anymore.
Now I'm wondering why I have so much white hair, but maybe. This is maybe to shift gears a little bit, but I would love to get everyone's maybe thoughts on experiences or tips on the topic of negotiating. Obviously, there's different places in which you can negotiate and for different reasons, but I more wonder about how to figure out what's okay to ask and what's not okay. Is it about time? You know, there's different margins in which you can do that, and what are things that maybe, you know, you don't want to piss anyone off. And so, I don't know, I just want to hear your experience on that part of negotiating, because I think that's something that I don't hear very often. Thank you.
So I guess I'll start as the chair at Howard. I have very limited power, and so you can ask for whatever, but this is what my dean says I can offer, and so that's what my dean says I can offer, right? Every institution is going to be different, but you have to be careful about negotiating with your institution, is because your institution might be like, okay, bye, and then you have to have some other plan in place, right? Because if you stay and your university told you no, then they realize that you'll always stay, and they don't have to ever really give you anything because you stayed, right? And deans and chairs and the university recognizes that of people. And so negotiating, you really have to talk to someone who's been in a similar situation, either at your institution that you trust or someone at a similar suited institution that has a similar kind of outlook on itself as your institution does. But it's really going to be specific to your situation and what you're willing to ask for and what you're willing not to get from your university and stay. Trayvon?
I'll add a couple of points to that. One, you can call me, because I'm getting very good at negotiating. But the second is, it really depends on who you're talking to. So over the course of my career, I've negotiated with chairs, I've negotiated with deans, I've negotiated with the provost, and people have very, very, very different ranges of power. Like, the provost is like the emperor, right? Like, he has like the Death Star, like that, the provost has everything. Deans have a lot, and I don't want to go down too much into the minutia of this, but different universities flow resources through the institution in very different ways, which makes something quite negotiable and other things much, much less negotiable, whether that's courses, whether that's a research budget, whether that's a research budget that has an annual dispensation, or a research budget that has one-time funds that have some sort of clock on them. It really depends on how the institution works out its finances. So when you begin negotiating, I think one of the first things, and this is getting back to Omari's point, is you have to understand what levers exist and what level they exist at. And the other point I would make in negotiating, particularly in the case of outside offers, my first piece of advice, and typically by the time people call me, it's later than this, but you should, you took game theory at some point. You should never name your price, right? Because what you want to do, right, in the end is extract your value from the institution, right? They'll tell you what your price is, and I have been in many negotiations in the dean's office where we had set up a budget for, someone for, say, a retention, and then they came with a salary demand that was so much less. We're not going to tell you, do you know what money we could have given you? We had all this research money. We have, we tell you, we are so glad. We just really put this together. It was just, we had to beg, borrow, and steal. We had a whole pile of gold that we were just sitting in the back doing. And so that happens a lot. And it's really important, particularly as academics, because those opportunities don't come very often to truly augment your well-being, and it sets you up on a trajectory. You have your annual raises on top of that, and so these are really limited opportunities to do that. So you want to handle those negotiations very carefully. It's also another factor of, as chair, I was very proactive because I don't want people getting on planes, and I don't want people bringing me letters of offer. I just detest losing people, and I really detest losing people over just a little bit of money. And sometimes when the other school writes down a number, it's going to be less than what I can get for you negotiating with the dean myself. So if you're proactive, sometimes you can get a lot. And part of that is also trust in relationships that go with any negotiation. So when I was chair, I did pull some faculty aside and I said, I know you say you want to go here or there, just give me 6 months and I will get something together for you. And I was able to do that. So it is something that takes skill, and it really is individual, and it requires knowing a lot more about your individual circumstances to give the best advice. But there are lots of different levels and complexity, and this is where the institution you're at is critically important.
I was trying to come really quickly before, but as someone, I'm also moving into a leadership position at my faculty. I'm in the Office of Faculty Affairs at my institution, and I am really excited about all these initiatives at many universities to try to increase and retain faculty from underrepresented groups. And I'm looking for ideas. What can you share with me that maybe you're implementing at your institution or you know of that would help us move the needle to try to retain in terms of retention? Thank you.
You need employee resource groups, whatever you want to call them, affinity groups. You need to provide a visible group for that person so that they know they're not alone. Like, if you don't have that, I don't know how many times I've heard people leave because they said they didn't feel like they fit in. They didn't feel like they were a part of the community. And that is something that is easy for the university to do and something they should do anyway, just so that they can have a way to promote it to other individual folks. I mean, let's face it, we're also a scarce commodity on the market, so there's a lot of people who are trying to gather our attention, and something like that could move the needle in of itself. I think that's an easy thing that does exist. I know that lots of universities also have separate side money that are used for these specific type of searches. So your chair should kind of be knocking on those provosts' door and say, look, we have this potential hire. What can you do? So you know going in that you can do some additional negotiations. Those are the types of easy things that can be done that doesn't require the faculty to come up, to get the faculty degree on anything is really hard. So it doesn't require that type of big movement, and it's something that's easy to do. So that's one of the first places I would say you should go. I know that we've done it at U of L. It still may not be enough, but it's definitely a beginning.
One thing I'd add to what you're saying, and I have pushed in my leadership role, is we really need a more cultural transformation at our institutions, because a lot of the reasons why people leave are not related to pay or research budgets or those sorts of things. They really are these sort of cultural issues. And that's why I also think it's really important, Francisca, as you think about these initiatives, you are going to have to find a way to pull in the staff at the institutions. Staff can be the source, particularly for Black women, of just a lot of grief. And over the most minuscule things, reimbursements, other sorts of things that are really, really small. And that for productive faculty, you're just not going to want to deal with, right? And I think this is the big issue, is that the people who become focus, of retention are the people who are productive, who have high levels of visibility, who can go other places. I would also encourage you to have, frankly, a watch list, right? Any good chair, any good dean should be able to point out the 10 faculty in their, unit, in their college, who would be flight risk. Mm-hmm. And this is where relationships become critically important. You pull them to you know this. I mean, we all know this. The people who are very visible, who can get on the phone and generate an offer and walk out the door. You want to make sure that they're happy. And it's mutually beneficial, because these are the people who are the chief sources of your unit's academic reputation, right? They're very visible people. That's one of the reasons why they are so prominent. And so if they are not happy and they're departing, it can really cause a lot of other, the negative externalities can be substantial. So don't be afraid of developing a list and why you'd want to keep talking to those people and being in community with those people, because they're also be honest with about the opportunities that are coming. But I can't emphasize enough that this is not just a faculty issue, because we're existing in institutions that have staff, that have students. And if that culture doesn't change, a big part of them fitting in is not just a faculty issue. It can be a whole lot of other things that are going on at the institution that we really, frankly, need to address.
All right, so this is going to be our last question. All right.
Thank you, Maury. So back in the day when I was an assistant professor, we were very much discouraged from writing papers with other people. It seems like a long time ago, maybe when we were accounting with an abacus, but they would, if you co-wrote a paper, they would count it as a half a paper. And I think, given that we're here talking about tenure in economics, and most of us today do a lot of co-writing, I thought it'd be valuable if you share your insights with young scholar educators about your thoughts on whether they should do this and the benefits of it. I mean, I denied myself the joy of co-writing until I got tenure because my colleagues just didn't value it.
So this is a topic that comes up every single time someone comes up for tenure in my department. And what I can say is that we want to know that you can do it at least once. Can you write a paper on your own, get it published at least once? After that, then the discount is going away. And the reason that's there is that we worry about, well, are these your ideas or someone else's ideas? And you're just kind of the research assistant in this process. If we see too many co-authored papers with your advisor and things of that nature, we worry, where is the creativity really coming from? But if you can signal to us that, no, it's you, that you are the initiator of these ideas, then it eases that outlook. So I know that, at least in my department, we've always looked for that one, and typically that's your job market paper, right? That's usually your baby, the one you went out with. That's usually the one that does that signaling for you. I have seen less influence on that in recent years. There still is an issue with alphabetical order and things of that nature, right? But I haven't seen it be as stressed as long as there's that one that exists.
So I sort of, second that. I think that we've definitely shifted to an equilibrium where sole-authored papers are becoming more and more rare. And so the job market paper tends to be the only one, although now we're seeing students come out with co-authored job market papers too. And then it's also changed over time, the number of co-authors on a paper. Before it used to be, co-writing with one person, then it became 3, now it's become 4. And, it's just, you have these very long co-author lists. So I think we've just basically shifted into that equilibrium of multiple authors on a paper. But then how do you signal your contribution? And I think that Jose is absolutely right. You don't want to write papers just with your advisor because that's going to be heavily discounted. But if you have a mix of co-authors, usually if you're writing with other junior people, people are going to assume that you were all involved in this process. Sometimes it's good to have 1 or 2 papers with senior co-authors because they might have more of a reputation and help shepherd the paper through faster and know the journal game better. So having a mix of co-authors, and then I think typically it ends up being that job market paper being the only sole-authored publication.
I'd say 2 things about this. One, some documentation for promotion and tenure has changed to the extent that now you have to say specifically what your contribution was, and it isn't evenly divided, and you have to say what it was. Like, I ran the regressions, I wrote the introduction, whatever it is, so you really do break the piece into its various aspects. But the argument that Jose made about sort of, we want to see you do this once, we had a very intense promotion and tenure meeting now many years ago about someone who had co-authored presentations, and we want to see that this person can do it once. And one of my labor economist colleagues, I think Sandy and probably Bill Spriggs will appreciate this, said, Kevin Murphy doesn't have any single author publications. And he's got John Bates Cogmell, and he's at University of Chicago. And that ended the discussion. It was like, because we come up with these standards, and then we get to see who becomes exceptions to these rules that we've made up about what we expect scholars to be able to do. So the real question is your scholarly record. And also now it's not uncommon in promotion and tenure cases to ask your co-authors to write letters about the contribution that you've made to it. I would still say that co-authoring with your advisor repeatedly would be probably frowned upon. But certainly co-authoring with people who are fellow assistant professors or junior faculty members, I don't think there should be any negatives attached to that anymore. But I also think that the process of assessing co-authored work has been slow, but it's developed as we have moved to more co-authoring relationships.
Thank you very much. This is very helpful. My tenure case goes up next year, as I've talked to many people about, so this is things I'm thinking about now. So just a quick question, going back a little bit to what Linda and Anusha, a few people were talking about on the kind of gendered differences in responsibilities faced by faculty. So if you're a woman and you're a Black woman, or faculty of color, women of color, you have all these service requirements, especially last year, BLM
got a lot of service requirements from my institution. And so one of the things that they did was to send us surveys to say, write how you've been affected by BLM protests or COVID, you have increased service expectations, et cetera. So one suggestion that a senior colleague gave me was to say, look, you need these issues to be top of, the kind of chair, the dean, et cetera's minds, that you particularly have gotten all of these requests much more than everyone else in the department. And like, it could be a signaling thing or it could be an information asymmetry thing, but put a paper from, I don't know, AER, JEL, whoever, that says these are the differential requirements or burdens faced by faculty, women of color in econ when it comes to tenure. And they said, put this, she sent me the paper, and it's like, include this paper in your tenure packet. I think she was being serious, so I was kind of like, I didn't think of that. But I don't know if that's something like, a lot of you or most of you or all of you have been chairs. Is that something that would be advice? Like, how do you mentioned this problem, so how do you, as a junior faculty member, like, how should I approach that? Should I talk to my chair and say, hey, can you highlight that? Like, when you talk about my case, should I write it in my personal statement that these are the burdens? Like, how do I do that? Do I put a paper from the AER and say this is like evidence? How do I highlight that or signal that to whoever will be reviewing my packet?
I would, go ahead, Linda.
First of all, there may be some guidelines in that, what Trevon was talking about, the APT or the tenure pack, that tells you all of those kind of detail things. Study it. That's my first, because each institution may be a little bit different. So you find that. I remember when it was going up, I read it, and I tore out pages. I mean, I had just special pages that I pay attention to. So that's what I would do, because I'm not sure that I know exactly, because your institution may be a little bit different than mine. Go ahead.
Yes, I totally agree with Linda's advice, and I would absolutely document it. So we had the CSWEP panel in the middle of the pandemic, and I think Dania was on it, and we had a dean from one of the Texas schools who was basically saying that during the pandemic, keep documenting all the, the impacts, the adverse impacts, but also on the service front, document all the different panels, all the different asks that have been made on the service front, and definitely put them into your service statement, so that it's just there for everyone to see that you were asked to do all of these things. And at UNC, we try to protect junior faculty from service obligations. So typically these service obligations just increase in a manifold way after tenure. But at the same time, I think it's very important. But we also have rules such as you need to have a woman on a committee, you need to have a person of color on the committee, and that just basically means if you're a woman of color, you get asked a lot a lot of times to be on committees and all kinds of service requests. So documenting it is absolutely important. I'm not sure about including that paper from the AER, because, people may or may not read it, but just kind of make it clear that these are all the service tasks that you have done.
Having that advocate in the room is so important. And that's why you want to build that relationship, because they can say things that it might be harder for you to say, or at least it doesn't convey it in the same way on paper. Really, that advocate, I know that being in that room, right? Like nothing goes in, nothing goes out. The only thing that ends up at the end is a report coming from the chair that goes up to the personnel committee. A lot can happen in that room, and if you don't have that advocate, it's so much easier for them to go the old school way and be like, oh, well, too bad, so sad. Having that advocate matters a lot.
To that point, this is another institutional difference. So at Ohio State, the chair gets an independent vote on a promotion and tenure case. So they can support what the faculty have said, and they can say the candidate should not be promoted. Another thing to put in there, which faculty, some universities like it, some don't, is they'll always look at the publications and say, how many publications and whatever outlets compare you to previous promotion and tenure cases. but they almost never do the same thing for service, which I think is really interesting. And I would like to move to that sort of level. A good chair, a good dean is looking at the service obligations among their faculty, because for equity issues that we're all talking about here, but that we track publications, down to, the actual number of sites, and there's big debates about whether we use Web of Science, whether we use Google sites, all these other metrics, but no one counts all of this service, and yet that's a really important input into your overall productivity. And so if you can find a way to compare your service obligations to members of your cohort or other members of your department, I think that makes a more compelling case than, say, the AER paper, because institutions are very different in terms of what the average service load is. But if you're serving on 1.5 times or twice the number of committees as other people in the department, that is something that needs to be noted. And I'll never know that if you just tell me you serve on 6 committees. I need to know everyone else is serving on 3.
And just to kind of follow up on that last point is, if there's things that you really want to point out in your package, you have to make sure that your personal statements say these things, right? Because in the end, the vast majority of people who read your packet don't know you, because it's eventually going to leave the department. It's going to go to other aspects. And if you want to explain something that's important to you, it has to be in your cover letter. Now, how you say it in the cover letter and how you convey that, you have to talk to people based on what the rules of your university are. But in general, if something affected you in a way that you think is going to affect the way your portfolio would have looked if it wouldn't have happened, you have to talk about it in as positive a light as always, because you're supposed to tell your own story in your cover letter. So just keep that in mind. And if you have if you want copies of old cover letters that people have written, I know Sandy and we used to share them. So if you send me an email, I could send you an examples of how people dealt with some of those kind of issues. And so one last one, Charlie, and then I think we're gonna end for real.
I'll try and be quick here. Since they're all chairs, this is actually comments directed at people who are having to negotiate with chairs. First thing, what Professor Logan said is really important. You have to decide whenever you're negotiating with an authority whether it's a first mover advantage or disadvantage. Usually it's a first mover disadvantage, so you never want to declare what your demands are. You want to see what they're going to offer first, and then you decide, is that enough? Related to that, you don't want to let the authorities know, if you're going to buy a house or something, don't let them know. That tells them that you're less mobile. If, on the other hand, you want to signal as much as you can that you're super mobile. So try and work hard to get invitations to give talks elsewhere. And don't do it in secret. Let them know. Let them know that you are potentially mobile, that other people think enough of you to invite you someplace. Write them a thank you letter and copy your chair. So all these things that make you really, they make it clear that, gosh, that person can go anywhere. When you get invited to referee a paper, do a super job of it, and if you're not used to it, then pass it on and get someone senior who does a ton of them and is good, which that doesn't always. But so maybe ask some other people to review, so you do a great job refereeing, because they'll ask you again. Once you've refereed a few times, then that journal is going to be more. They're going to wait. They're going to wait a little bit longer. That reject becomes an R&R. That R&R becomes a conditional acceptance, and so on. So make friends in the profession. For your personal statement, get some other senior people outside your institution. I get called on by people from other institutions to act, because I don't have a dog in that fight. And so I can give honest advice, and maybe I know something about it. Same with these people. So you can turn to, Professor Swinton, because he's not doing anything, and ask him for help if you're coming up for tenure someplace else. But take advantage. That's where the community, I believe, one of you all said, community is super important. use it.
Thank you, sir. Gwen, did you want to say anything before we end? Okay. So thank you all for your time and consideration. I'd like to thank the panelists for their thoughts. And if you do have any other questions that you weren't comfortable with asking, I'm sure everybody in the panel will read the email and answer your questions for you, because we really want you all to be successful, because years ago we were all in your position, afraid about what was going to happen with tenure in our careers, and people helped us out to get to where we are, so we're all willing to help you out to get to where you want to go.
Yes.
Right.
I just want to say one thing. Please remember that in academics, favors are intergenerational. That means you should always be reaching back, right? Like, there are people in this room who helped me, and that's why I'm willing to do the work now. So the favors that you make today, they're really repayments for something you got in the past, right? Always reach back. Remember, there are intergenerational pacts here. Thank you.
All right.